On to our other big story tonight. US President Donald Trump has said his plan to end the war in Ukraine has been fine-tuned, and he's sending his special envoy Steve Witkoff to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin and US Army Secretary Dan Driscoll to meet with Ukrainian officials. Trump suggested he could eventually meet with Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, but not until further progress has been made in negotiations. Speaking to reporters, Trump said resolving the war was difficult and described his 28-point plan as a work in progress. That is not a plan, it was a concept, he said.
Started with Russia. We're having some talks with Russia. Ukraine is doing well. I think they're pretty happy about it. They'd like to see it end. And we won't know for a little while, but we're making progress.
You said one of the big secrets.
We settled 8 wars, and I thought this would be one of the easier ones because of my relationship with President Putin. But this is probably one of the more difficult ones. There's a lot of hatred.
What's the next step?
They're going to keep talking. They're talking to Russia now. Steve Witkoff is going over, maybe with Jared. I'm not sure about Jared going, but he's involved in the process. Smart guy, and they're going to be meeting with President Putin, I believe, next week in Moscow.
Trump's plan for ending the nearly 4-year-long war emerged last week. It heavily favored Russia, prompting Zelensky to quickly engage with American negotiators. European leaders, fearing for their own future, facing Russian aggression, but apparently sidelined by Trump in drawing up the proposal, scrambled to steer the negotiations towards accommodating their concerns. Trump said he believed Witkoff would be meeting with Putin next week in Moscow, with his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, potentially joining the meeting. People are starting to realize it's a good deal for both parties. That's what Trump said. The president played down the element of his plan that would require Ukraine to cede territory to Russia, suggesting that Russian forces were anyway likely to seize the land they're seeking. Trump said the way it's going, it's just moving in one direction. So eventually, that's land that over the next couple of months might be gotten by Russia anyway. At the center of Trump's plan is the call on Ukraine to concede the entirety of its eastern Donbas region, even though a vast swath of that land remains in Ukrainian control. Some analysts say it would take several years for the Russian military to completely seize the territory based on its current rate of advances. French President Emmanuel Macron has said peace efforts are gathering momentum and clearly at a crucial juncture. He spoke after senior US and Ukrainian officials met in Geneva on Sunday, and a virtual coalition of the willing meeting of Ukrainians' European allies took place on Tuesday. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio participated in both those meetings. Rubio said negotiations are getting a new impetus and we should seize this momentum. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said, "I do think we're moving in a positive direction." However, Alexander Bevis, one of the Ukrainian delegates at the Geneva talks, cautioned that it was premature to say that something had actually been agreed upon. He has said the US is aware that the strength of security guarantees for Ukraine would define the sustainability of the deal. Ukrainian President Zelensky has said the list of necessary steps to end the war can become workable, and he plans to discuss the sensitive outstanding issues with Trump.
Ukraine has the framework developed by our teams in Geneva. That framework is on the table, and we are ready to move forward together with the United States of America, with personal engagement of President Trump, and with Europe, with leaders, and with all partners who have their strengths and capacity to help. And I'm ready to meet with President Trump. And there are sensitive points to discuss. We have them still, and we think that the presence of European leaders could be helpful. And let's discuss some key issues today in a closed format.
Russian officials have been reserved in their comments on the peace plan. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said on Tuesday that Moscow is in touch with US officials about peace efforts. He said, "We expect them to provide us with a version they consider an interim one in terms of completing the phase of coordinating this text with the Europeans and the Ukrainians." European leaders have cautioned that the road to peace will be a long one.